those who came the first time and helped us with it. And now we get to see the finished product. And hopefully, our prayer is that this book will help many sisters and brothers or Asian Americans deal with some of the things that have been perhaps secretly held in our hearts, because it was a vulnerable process. It's a process of really unloading some of the places that we didn't even know existed until we intersected with these biblical characters and recognized, oh my goodness, I didn't know that I in particular had this drive or this competition or this man complex, but in mirroring ourselves with some of the biblical characters, there was this eye-opening aha moment, and God was pointing to us and saying, hey, let's deal with this. And so that was my experience in terms of writing this chapter. My chapter is on Lot's wife. The first time I read or I heard the story of Lot's wife, I was so appalled. I'm like, how could this woman look back? When she was told by the angels, don't look back, how could she look back? What is her deal? Why couldn't she be obedient like a good little Asian girl that I was? And so when I first read it, at first I was angry at Lot's wife, and then secondly, I got really fearful that I would not look back, because I didn't want to turn into a pillar of salt myself. And this happened right about the time when I was immigrating. My family immigrated when I was 9 years old. And so I remember a lot of the stories of saying goodbye, the crying, the tears at the airport, and then coming to the U.S. And when we came to the U.S., I thought that I cannot look back. I thought I had to go full throttle ahead. And as my chapter says, I had my gear permanently in the drive mode, and I was just going for it. I had a driven life. No Asian Americans have a drivenness about us. That's why we're called the Asian, what are they?
Model minority.
Thank you. That's why we're called that, because we have this drive to achieve, especially those of us who immigrated. We have this elusive dream about the American dream, to achieve, to be something, to do something. And so I think I had that, I bought into the same notion of that, and particularly because I'm PK, I had to have everything backed up by a biblical story. Lot was my biblical story. And I remember in church, when you had, the praise band and everybody singing, I have decided, no turning back, no turning back. And that was my story, no turning back. And then there was a time when God really dealt with my heart to say, what's going on? Why the need to achieve? Why the need to drive yourself to a place of insisting on being somebody, being something? And I had to really stop and look at that. And in me stopping and looking, I came to Lot's wife again, because she's the one who drove me to not turn back. And I found that there's a story of Lot's wife also in the New Testament. And in the New Testament, it says to remember Lot's wife. How many of you obeyed that? How many of us really remember Lot's wife? So as I was researching, that's our modus operandi. As I was researching Lot's wife, I came upon all these rabbinical, not too many, but rabbinical retelling of Lot's wife, and she had a name. She was given a name, and there was a whole bunch of kind of oral history surrounding her, praising her, giving her a name. Her name, do you want to know her name? Read my chapter. No, actually, I will give it to you. It's Irit, I-R-I-T, and it comes from a flower, meaning it's a lily, it's a wild lily. And there's a beautiful intonation about that name. And when the Septuagint, or the Greek translation of Old Testament, selected to say look back, the carefully chosen word for looking back is epiplephin, and that means to look back with care. And that made me really look back again to Lot and remember, why did the Septuagint writers choose that particular Greek word? And what I recognized in reading the rabbinical stories and whatnot is that she left 2 sons-in-law, as we've read in the biblical text, but she also had other daughters and perhaps even grandchildren. And in looking back, the kind of androcentric or the male-centered traditional reading of looking back was always kind of portrayed as her looking back at the material things that she's leaving behind. But really what she's looking back with care and concern and compassion is looking back at the relationships that she's leaving behind. The people, the neighbors, the ones that she's made ties with. And I thought this was so healing for me that I then was given permission in some ways to look back with care and compassion and tenderness for people whom I've left behind. I've left behind a lot of folks in Korea, both family and friends, which I never really took a second chance to look back because I had this cut-off relationship. And this story then gave me permission to stop, look back, reflect upon the people that I left behind. And in doing so, I also realized that my image of God had been distorted. This is part of my dissertation that I'm trying to finish. I've been trying to finish for the last 2 years. But part of the God image that this story had originally had for me was this terrorizing, calculating, unforgiving God who was tit for tat. He will give you according to what he deemed you deserved. But within the story of Genesis where Lot's wife is portrayed, there's a story of God who deals with Abraham. Remember Abraham bargaining with God to save Sodom? And God was giving permission to Abraham to talk back to him, to bargain with him. And I thought that's a beautiful story of God whose mercy and grace is wide enough, God who is liberated enough to have that compassionate heart to say, hey, talk to me, deal with me, reflect with me, talk. Let's reason together. And so that's the kind of God that we find both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, a God of mercy. I have this upside down. I haven't looked at it yet. And so I think what this story for me has taught me in the mirrored reflection is that the biblical character mirrored to me something of my needs, and what I have mirrored back to the biblical character before my reflective days was my own portrayal or my own projections of what I thought or assumed or maybe presumed God wanted from me. And so in God's invitation for me to stop and remember Lot's wife, it's taught me a radical new way of reframing this story and perhaps being liberated and freed to deal with my own needs, to grieve, to connect, to have what us Koreans call chong, a sticky connectedness, a stickiness about being interconnected, interdependent, so that we're not separate individuals functioning in the world alone, but that we are indeed connected to live life together, to share life in mutuality. And so that's what this story has reflected back to me in terms of reframing this story. I invite you to read the chapter and dialogue with me. I'll be happy to learn from you what you've learned from this chapter, and then maybe have gone further with what God's doing with Lot's wife. Hear it. Thank you.